talking to a scout who said you're a top 5 talent, but you won't go in the top 5.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I understand, what people are thinking and what people say. I believe that any team that gets me is such a blessing, and I know that God's gonna put me in the right position no matter where I'm at. But I can't think. I can't change what people are thinking. A team has where I'm going to be at, and a team knows where I'm going to be at. And if that's in the top 10, if that's not, then it's going to be a blessing either way. So I'm just trying to enjoy the moment. And people are going to have opinions, but we all don't know, so we're just all going to see in a week.
That's Texas running back Bijan Robinson with Dan Patrick, and it's amazing to me. There's a common thread when these guys are asked questions like that. They are so wired, Peter, to submit to this process. They have no choice. They got to pick their college, and we see more and more guys picking colleges midstream, transferring here, transferring there, and then all of a sudden you're in this mode where you have no control over the process whatsoever, and you could just see it ooze from Bijan Robinson. If you watch the Bryce Young video, I asked him about, you were going to go to USC, and then you went to Alabama. You ever think, boy, it'd be nice if I get to choose where I go in the NFL? And he had kind of a knowing laugh, and they just submit. They have no choice. It's kind of a weird thing, but you just have to go along with the ride. You're strapped into the roller coaster, and it's going to take you where it takes you.
Hey, Bijan Robinson is such an interesting story. And look, I'm not necessarily right on this. I have written and said and gotten tomatoes thrown at me because I have said, in my opinion, the Philadelphia Eagles at number 10 with a gift draft pick that cost them it was almost handed to him on a silver platter last year in the trade with New Orleans. Okay. And this is why Howie Roseman is so good at his job, because he understands that I am building a team for the long haul. So you almost have this bonus pick right here. And there's been this great debate, Mike. Well, geez, Bijan Robinson, you're not going to sign a running back to a second contract. So let's just say, for the sake of argument, you have Bijan Robinson either for 4 or 5 years, because you're right. You almost certainly will not sign a running back to a second contract. Well, I guess I would just say, what about, Andre Dillard and Jalen Reagor? Did you sign them to second contracts? There is a bust factor in the first round of an NFL draft that it doesn't matter how great a general manager you are. And Howie Roseman is great at his job. You are going to bust on some picks. Sometimes you're going to pick Jalen Reagor instead of Justin Jefferson. That's just the way it goes, okay? And all I'm saying is that, can you imagine if for 3 or 4 years you get a guy who is a significant, not a minor, but a significant help to you to get you to another Super Bowl, and at the same time will cost you an average of $5.5 million on the cap over a 4-year period. Obviously, that jumps up if you exercise the 5th-year option and have to pay him more in the 5th year, which who knows, you might do, but you might not. And the last thing I would say about Bijan Robinson is I had a note in my column this week, and I had a video in my column this week, Mike, of Bijan Robinson in traffic out of the slot as a slot receiver, making a contested one-handed catch at the 5-yard line against Iowa State that if it were Justin Jefferson, it would be on every highlight on ESPN that night. And so when I talked to Steve Sarkisian, the Texas coach, about him, and he said, I get in trouble for saying this. He had the best hands on our team last year. And wide receivers don't want to hear that. But I've talked to people in the league who said, if you want to, there could be games, matchup games, that you would play in the NFL. And you would take Bijan Robinson out of the running back slot for maybe 15 to 20 snaps a game, and you would play him as a wide receiver. You would play him in the slot. You could even play him outside. And my only point about this is I understand that we always want to think of the long term. And you know what, Mike? If you could get Peter Skoronski to plug in for the next 10 years at right guard, do it. Go ahead, do it. It's a smart pick by Howie Roseman. But all I can say is you're going to be awfully tempted, and you should be awfully tempted, if you're the Philadelphia Eagles at number 10, or if you're any team looking for a home run hitter early in this draft, you're going to be tempted, even though you know that this guy may not be a long-term guy for you.
The fact that competent running backs are available in every round of the draft and undrafted, as Austin Eckler was, has raged this debate over whether or not you actually use that first-round pick on a running back. Here's a mashup of various decision makers in the NFL on where they land as to this question of whether or not you use a first-round pick at a position where you can find a guy who does that job anywhere in the draft. Have a listen.
I understand the narrative about that, but if you think that player is that good, then if he's out there producing for you, then I don't think anybody's going to look back and say, I don't think anybody said in 2016 or 17 or 18 that, oh man, Todd Gurley picked him at 10. Like, no, it's just he was just a really good running back, and he was one of the top prospects in the draft. So we didn't really bat an eye about it.
Just in general, any position group is hard to eliminate. You start eliminating it, you can't get to 28. So if you say we're not going to take a running back, or we're not going to take a tight end, or we're not going to take a receiver, or we're not going to take, once you eliminate a position group or two, you can't get to 28 anymore, and you end up with third and fourth round picks in your top 28.
For us here is that we utilize this opportunity to get a unique player for our team. Certainly not planning to be picking at this point in the near future. That doesn't mean, obviously things happen, but we're not planning for that. And so we understand how important it is to get this right. And how do you get it right is you make sure you get a unique player.
Steven, you ever sitting in your office and looking out at the practice field and thinking to yourself, man, I can totally see Bijan Robinson running behind our offensive line?
Well, Bijan's just had a great career at Texas. Certainly, I don't think I've seen any set of circumstances that he's not a first-round pick. That's off to him, and certainly a guy. I'm sure when that first day is over, he's going to certainly have a team, and you never know.
Oh, it would be something if he ends up with the Cowboys, but 26 is probably going to be too low to get him. I was on 105.3 The Fan yesterday, and that's the station where Stephen Jones made those comments, and they're already on the bandwagon of what does it take to trade up, how far do you have to go, and that's the balance. Peter, 2005, there were 3 running backs taken in the top 5. Ronnie Brown, Cedric Benson, and Cadillac Williams. We are a long way from that. There hasn't been a guy taken higher than 24 since Saquon Barkley in 2018. You had Najee Harris. You had Josh Jacobs at 24. Last year, there was no first-round running back at all. That's the balance. When do you pull the trigger on a running back? And when it's a guy who's one of the top talents in the draft, who cares if he's a running back? I'm a firm believer that there's going to be a playoff contender that gets Bijan Robinson next Thursday night. And what we're going to be talking about Friday morning is that team's a Super Bowl contender now with Bijan Robinson.
Could be. I mean, it depends who takes him. If Tampa Bay takes him, I'm not saying it. If Washington takes him, I'm not saying it. I think it depends on who takes him. But I do think that Philadelphia, for instance, and obviously they had Bijan Robinson in for a visit, and I do think that if Philadelphia takes him, they add a weapon that is going to make their offense increasingly and maybe incredibly hard to stop.
Well, and part of this, too, when you heard the sound there, they'd like nothing more if they're of the mindset of you can find a running back anywhere. Wherever those teams are drafting, they would rather the teams in front of them draft a running back because that pushes the players down the board they'd rather take.
Yeah.
So that's part of the psychological dance of the pre-draft conversations that are had by every team. It's required they all have these pre-draft press conferences. But when you have a player who can be as dynamic as Robinson, when you talk about him playing in the slot, you move him away from that scrum of bodies, you reduce the injury risk over what it is when you're just banging into the line. And that's the problem. Saquon Barkley, he had the talent to be the second overall pick in the draft. But because of the position, it was inevitable he was going to get injured. You can't just say it's his fault. It's the position's fault. So when you have a position that you know generates more injuries than any other on the field, that's a reason not to use a top 5, top 10 pick, even if it's a top 5 or a top 10 talent, especially when the gap between the top 5 talent and the other running backs out there isn't quite as great. And you can, if you block for the guy, if you know he's going to hold on to the football, if you trust him to pick up blitzers, he can still be a very good running back in the NFL. He may not be Bijan Robinson when he's healthy, but he can still be good enough that we can address other positions. That's the dance. That's the problem. And that's what makes it fascinating, because I think Robinson is the best running back prospect since Barkley. So where does that land? I don't know. Do you have a sense of where the sweet spot is, where the window opens, where the window closes on Robinson?
If you ask me what the over-under is on where he'll be picked, Mike, and keep in mind that I think this is one of those things that you look at it and you say, okay, where's the sweet spot for Bijan Robinson? Okay, most people would probably say Philadelphia at 10 is too high. New England at 14 doesn't really fit Belichick, but Belichick is a strange drafter, so you never know. My thought right now is that I think that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 19 and right in that area, I'd say the over-under on Bijan Robinson, to me, is probably about pick number 20. Now, Seattle has pick 20. I don't think they're taking him because I think they're in good stead there. It wouldn't shock me if the Chargers at 21 took him, especially because of what we're seeing and what we're hearing now with Austin Eckler. But right around 20 would be my over-under for him.
Boy, and let me tell you, if the Chargers take him, that's a prime example of a team where the vibe becomes dramatically different if they take Bijan Robinson. You pair him up with Justin Herbert and those receivers, even though Austin Eckler is no slouch, just that high-end potential for Bijan Robinson would make people say, wow. I'm fascinated by the Buccaneers. And see, this is where, when we get to the off-season churn of sound bites, you've got Jason Light, the GM of the Buccaneers, talking up Rachaad White as a potential stud for them. And, of course, White is going to sign on to that. He wants to be that guy. You can have a lot of players who think they have a certain standing within the team who find out otherwise on Thursday night. And Rachaad White,
that always happens.
I think back to 5 years ago. I know, but it's one of the fascinating human dynamics of this. I think back to 5 years ago when Joe Flacco was scheduled to appear, and I think did go through with it, some Ravens draft experience the day after they drafted Lamar Jackson. It's like, oops, that got a little awkward, but that's just part of the reality of having that new crop of players every single year. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.